The nights in my house had grown quiet, almost too quiet. My husband would return from work tired, drop his bag by the door, and collapse onto the sofa. We hardly spoke anymore except about bills, groceries, or things that needed fixing around the house. I would watch him scroll his phone in silence and wonder if this was the life I was meant to live, married, stable, but with a hollow ache that nothing seemed to fill. It wasn't until I met him that I realized how starved I truly was for attention. He wasn't supposed to mean anything. Just a colleague I saw occasionally, tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose presence filled a room. His laughter was unrestrained, confident, and every time his eyes met mine, I felt something shift inside me. I tried to ignore it, brushing off the spark as harmless, but my heart would betray me with its sudden racing whenever he leaned close to explain something or brushed past me in a corridor. The first time I caught myself staring, I bit my lip so hard it almost hurt. It wasn't just the way he looked, it was the way he carried himself, powerful, sure, almost dangerous. My husband had long stopped touching me with desire, but this man's very presence reminded me of everything I was missing. The shame came quickly after. I was a married woman, bound by vows. Yet here, I was entertaining thoughts that I shouldn't even let form in my mind. Still, I couldn't help it. The more I tried to stay away, the more fate seemed to place him near me. A hand brushing against mine when we reached for the same folder, his body leaning just close enough to feel the warmth of him without touching, his voice lowering when he spoke to me, as though his words were meant for me alone. Every small interaction lingered in my head long after I got home. One afternoon, it was just the two of us. Everyone else had left early, and I stayed behind to finish some reports. He walked past my desk, then stopped, leaning casually against the edge. "You work too hard," he said, his eyes scanning my face. I laughed nervously, avoiding his gaze, but when I looked up, he was still staring, unblinking, as if he could see the battle raging inside me. My lips burned from the way I bit down on them, trying to control the trembling in my voice. Something about the way he stood there, so close, made me feel small, and yet seen all at once. I told myself to pack my things and leave, to end this moment before it became dangerous, but instead I found myself waiting, hoping he would say more, do more. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. His gaze dipped once to my mouth, and I knew he noticed the nervous way I worried my lip. My chest tightened, heat flooding me, guilt warring with excitement. I thought of my husband at home, tired and oblivious, and for the first time in years I felt alive. Not safe, not content, but truly alive. When my phone buzzed that night, it wasn't my husband checking in. It was him. Just a short message. Still biting that lip? My breath caught, my hands trembling as I read the words over and over. It was harmless enough to deny, but I knew what he meant. He had seen me. Really seen me. I should have ignored it. I should have turned off my phone, crawled into bed, and pretended the day had never happened. But instead, I typed back a reply, my heart pounding in my chest. It was only a few words, but I knew in that moment that I had already stepped onto a path I couldn't easily turn back from. The next evening, I found myself staring at my phone more than usual, waiting for a message that might not even come. My husband was in the living room, half asleep with the television flickering in the background, while I sat in the bedroom pretending to read. Every time my screen lit up, my heart jumped. It wasn't until much later, when the house had gone quiet, that his name appeared again. Just one word this time. Come. I froze, my breath catching as though I'd been caught doing something wrong, even though no one had seen the message. My thumb hovered above the screen, torn between deleting it and answering. I told myself not to, whispered inside my head that I was a wife, not some girl chasing after temptation. But the truth was, my body betrayed me long before my mind could reason with it. My pulse raced, my lips parted, and before I could stop myself, I typed, "Where?" The address he sent wasn't far, just a discreet apartment in a quiet part of town. I could have ignored it, gone to bed, let my husband's soft snores remind me of the vows I had taken. Instead, I found myself slipping into a dress that made me feel alive again, applying lipstick with trembling hands and covering the faint guilt with perfume. Every step out of the house felt like a betrayal, yet the thrill was intoxicating. When I reached his door, my knees nearly buckled. I told myself this was insane, that I should turn back before I did something I could never undo. But the moment the door opened, all the strength drained out of me. He stood there, shirt unbuttoned just enough to expose the lines of his chest, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me forget every excuse I had prepared. Inside, the air felt heavy, charged, as though the walls themselves knew the secret about to unfold. I tried to speak, to say something that would make me sound in control, but the words never came. He stepped closer, and I felt the heat of him before his hand even touched me. My breath hitched, and my lips trembled under the weight of desire I had no right to feel. The first brush of his fingers along my arm made my entire body tense. I whispered his name, half in warning, half in surrender. But the warning melted when his hand slid lower, when his presence filled every inch of space around me. My teeth sank into my lip, hard, the same nervous gesture he had already noticed before, only this time it wasn't nerves, it was need. He leaned in, his voice a low murmur against my ear, telling me I didn't have to be afraid. I closed my eyes, 1,000 images of my husband flashing through my mind, but none of them strong enough to stop me. I let him into my arms, into my life, into the place I had kept locked for so long. The room spun as his weight pressed against me, his size overwhelming, almost frightening, yet it only pulled me deeper into the fire. Every kiss was a rebellion, every touch a crime I willingly committed. The guilt was sharp, stabbing at the edges of my mind, but it was drowned by the rush of passion that surged through me. For years I had been untouched, unseen, unheard. Now I was all of those things at once. When it was over, silence filled the space where our breathing once was. I lay there, tangled in sheets that weren't mine, staring at the ceiling, wondering what line I had just crossed. He turned to me, brushing hair from my face, and I felt both cherished and condemned in the same breath. Leaving was harder than arriving. As I walked back through the quiet streets, the night air cooled, the heat still burning on my skin, but nothing could calm the storm inside me. I slipped into my house, my husband still asleep on the sofa, and forced a smile as though nothing had changed. But everything had. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and restless nights. I would wake up beside my husband, the weight of his arm draped over me, and feel nothing but guilt pressing against my chest. Yet as soon as my phone buzzed with his name, the guilt would dissolve into hunger, a hunger I couldn't control. It started small, messages exchanged late at night, coded words no one else would understand. But soon, those words weren't enough. I found myself inventing excuses to see him again. A late meeting at work, errands that somehow took hours longer than they should, visits to friends that didn't exist. Each lie slipped easier from my lips than the last. Every time I thought about stopping, about ending whatever madness this was, I remembered how it felt to be wanted, to be touched, to be alive again. And the thought of letting that go seemed impossible. The encounters grew more daring. Once, in the dim light of his car parked behind an empty lot, I felt his hand find mine as if it had always belonged there. My pulse hammered as the world outside blurred, leaving only the heat inside the vehicle. Another time, we met in his apartment again, and I stayed long enough to watch dawn sneak through the blinds, terrified of being caught, but unable to pull myself away. With every secret meeting, my body betrayed me further. My smile lingered longer, my clothes chosen with care, my eyes brighter though shadowed by sleeplessness. I told myself it was harmless, that no one could see through me, but deep down I knew I was unraveling. It didn't take long for my husband to notice. At first it was small comments. Why was I dressing up more than usual? Why did I seem distracted when he spoke? Why was I suddenly guarding my phone like it contained state secrets? I laughed it off, brushed his suspicions aside, but the unease in his voice lingered. Sometimes, I'd catch him staring at me too long, as if trying to read the truth in my eyes. But still, I couldn't stop. The man I had let into my life became an addiction. His touch was fire, his words a spell, his presence a drug I craved more each day. I told myself I was in control, that I could walk away whenever I chose, but every time I tried, I was pulled back with just a single glance, a single message. It wasn't just physical anymore. Somewhere between the nights of tangled sheets and the whispered promises, he became the one I confided in. I told him about my emptiness at home, about how unseen I felt, about how my marriage had become a quiet prison. He listened in a way my husband hadn't in years, his attention undivided, his responses tender. The more I gave him of my secrets, the more he owned pieces of me I could never take back. And yet, every time I returned home, guilt crawled up my skin like a shadow. I'd watch my husband sleep, his face softened by dreams, and I'd wonder how much longer I could keep betraying him. But then, I'd remember the weight of another man's hand on my body, and the guilt would blur into desire once more. One evening, as I slipped into bed after claiming to be out with friends, my husband stirred. His eyes opened, sharp even in the dark, and he asked quietly, "Where were you?" The question was simple, but my heart nearly stopped. I forced a laugh, gave another excuse, and kissed his forehead as though nothing was wrong. He didn't press further, but I could feel it. The seed of doubt had been planted. I lay awake long after he drifted back to sleep, staring into the darkness, caught between two worlds I had created. One was safe, familiar, and suffocating. The other was dangerous, intoxicating, and impossible to resist. The night it all came crashing down was nothing like I imagined. There wasn't a grand revelation, no dramatic confession. It was something far simpler, and somehow that made it worse. My husband had borrowed my phone to make a call, a harmless request I hadn't prepared for. I watched from across the room as he scrolled, his expression tightening, his lips pressing into a thin line. When he turned to me, holding the screen out, I knew the lies had finally caught up to me. It was just a message, not even one of the risque ones. Just his name, paired with words no wife should ever send another man. "I need you tonight." The silence that followed felt like a blade against my skin. My husband's eyes were not angry at first. They were wounded, betrayed, filled with a kind of quiet devastation that tore through me far more than rage ever could. I tried to speak, to explain, but the words tangled in my throat. He didn't shout.
He didn't strike.
He simply asked, "How long?" His voice cracked, and that was what broke me. Tears spilled before I could hold them back, and my confession came out in fragments, weeks, months, stolen moments I couldn't erase. The look on his face as he listened was one I'll never forget, a mixture of disbelief and heartbreak, the image of a man realizing the person he trusted most had shattered him. What followed was a storm neither of us could escape. He demanded details, then recoiled when I gave them. He asked why, though no answer I offered could ever fill the void my betrayal had carved into him. At one point, he walked out of the room, slamming the door so hard the walls shook, only to return moments later, as if he couldn't stand the silence, without confronting me again. For hours, we circled the wreckage of what we once were. Every tear, every raised voice, every pause between words felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. I wanted to reach for him, to beg him to remember the life we had built, but my hands shook too much to move. Deep down, I knew there was no repair, not really. Trust, once broken, is not easily remade. Days turned into weeks, and though we lived under the same roof, the distance between us became unbearable. He no longer looked at me the same way, no longer touched me, no longer asked about my day. He slept on the edge of the bed, his back turned, as though even in sleep he couldn't risk facing me. The silence in the house was heavier than ever, filled with everything we couldn't say. And yet, in the quiet moments, I found myself reaching for my phone, tempted to message the man who had started it all. The thought horrified me. How could I still crave him after destroying everything? But desire doesn't listen to reason. My heart was torn, my body betraying me, my soul fractured between guilt and longing. Eventually, my husband made his decision. He didn't leave in a fury. He didn't throw my things out or demand I pack mine. He simply told me one morning, his voice hollow, that he couldn't look at me without seeing the lies. He said he didn't know if he could ever forgive me, and that even if he did, forgiveness wouldn't erase the images burned into his mind. Then he walked away, and though the door didn't slam, the sound of it closing was the loudest I'd ever heard. Now, when I sit in the same quiet house, I think about the choices that brought me here. I think about the night I bit my lip and let another man in, and how that one moment unraveled years of promises. Sometimes I tell myself it was worth it, that I felt alive, desired, seen. Other times, the weight of what I lost crushes me, and I wonder if fleeting passion is ever worth the price of trust. The truth is, there is no neat ending. I am left with memories that burn and scars that ache. And every time I catch my reflection, I see the face of a woman who once had everything, but gave it away for something she could never hold on to.